A widow opens an email and finds evidence of her late husband's affair, but the pictures came from her only child. That betrayal cuts deepest. She nearly cut her daughter from the will, leaving only one symbolic dollar. Watch how that act of punishment became their path to redemption. I never imagined I would one day consider striking my own daughter's name from my will. Yet there I was, standing by the kitchen window of my Connecticut home on a gray autumn morning, absently swirling a spoon in my untouched coffee as that unthinkable thought took root. Outside, the maple leaves had begun to turn russet and gold, their reflection flickering in the window glass. It should have been a comforting sight, but my heart was too heavy to appreciate the familiar beauty of a New England fall. A tremor in my hand sent ripples across the coffee's surface, as if even the smallest movement could unsettle the fragile peace I was trying to maintain. For most of my 56 years, I believed myself blessed with a loving family and a peaceful life. In this quiet Connecticut town, nestled between rolling hills and calm, tree-lined streets, I had raised my only daughter, Emily, with all the care and warmth I could give. My husband, Richard, was my high school sweetheart turned devoted partner, the steady rock of our household whose laughter could fill a room. We built a life together here, a white picket fence around a cozy colonial home, laughter echoing in the halls, the scent of fresh-baked cinnamon rolls on Sunday mornings. Richard had a gentle humor and a steadfast kindness, the kind of man who brought me coffee in bed on our anniversary and never missed a single one of Emily's school recitals. If there were any cracks in our perfect picture, I was blissfully unaware of them. Our dearest friend Elaine was practically part of the family. She and I had met in college, and over the years, she became as close as a sister. Elaine was even Emily's godmother, always doting and offering advice, and we shared holidays and countless memories together. In my eyes, we three adults formed a solid wall of love and support around Emily. Neighbors often commented on how lucky we all were. Three musketeers, some called us jokingly, seeing Elaine at our dinner table as often as her own. I cherish those moments as if preserving them in amber, convinced that the warmth of those days would carry us through any storm. All that changed in the span of a year. It's frightening how life can twist upside down, how the ground you stand on can crack without warning. Richard fell ill late last summer. What we first wrote off as persistent fatigue turned out to be something far more sinister. The diagnosis arrived like a rogue wave crashing into our idyllic world. The months that followed became a blur of antiseptic hospital corridors and the steady beep of monitors. During those harrowing days, I clung to hope and to the image of our life as it had been. Elaine often sat by my side through the worst of it, her hand warm on my shoulder, whispering that Richard would pull through and that I needed to stay strong for Emily. And Emily? My sweet girl. She was a pillar of strength in her own way. At 27, she somehow balanced managing our household with countless hospital visits. She cooked meals when I couldn't find the energy, sorted out insurance papers that made my head spin, and even convinced her boss to let her work remotely so she could be home more often. In those dark days, I remember thinking how fortunate I was, even amid crisis, to have such a caring daughter and such a devoted friend. That thought was a small light in a very dark time. But Richard did not pull through. A brisk November wind stripped the trees bare the week my husband died. In a matter of days, I went from hopeful wife to grieving widow. The funeral passed in a blur of black coats and murmured condolences. I recall standing by Richard's graveside under a slate-gray sky, the air cold and brittle in my lungs, with Emily clutching my arm to keep me from collapsing. Elaine's gentle presence was at my back, steadying me when I swayed. My world had shifted on its axis, but at least I still had my daughter by my side and the steady support of my best friend to see me through. In the weeks that followed, our home felt unbearably quiet. I would wake up expecting to hear Richard humming in the kitchen, only to remember he was gone. Each new daybreak pressed salt into that wound. I often found solace in small rituals, polishing the heirloom oak dining table he loved, watering the fern he had kept in his study, flipping through old photo albums late at night when sleep refused to come. Grief's weight pressed on every moment, yet I took fragile comfort in knowing that the two people I loved most were still with me. We three, Emily, Elaine, and I, grew even closer in our shared mourning. Or so I thought. If only sorrow had been the only cloud over us in those months after Richard's passing. Unbeknownst to me, beneath the layers of grief, something else was brewing, something I couldn't yet name. In hindsight, I see the subtle fissures that had begun to form in my once solid reality. I noticed a strained note in Emily's voice when I reminisced about her father, a flicker in her eyes that I dismissed as the pain of loss. There were nights I found her standing in the hallway, gazing at the closed door of Richard's study with an unreadable expression. And Elaine, usually so forthright and bright, grew oddly quiet around me. Sometimes I caught her watching me with a look almost like guilt, but I waved it off as my own weary imagination. Grief plays tricks on the mind, at least that's what I told myself. Little did I know, the true heartache had not even begun. The gravest of betrayals still lay hidden in the shadows, waiting to shatter the fragile peace I was so desperately holding on to. I remember the day, a few months after Richard's funeral, when the first fissure in my bond with Emily truly appeared. It was a mild spring afternoon, the kind that carried the promise of renewal on the breeze. I had invited Elaine over for lunch, hoping to fill the emptiness of the house with some friendly chatter and laughter. The two of us sat in the sunroom overlooking my dormant rose garden, sipping Earl Grey as sunlight danced across the patterned tiles. For a short while, I felt almost peaceful. We talked idly about the upcoming charity bake sale and the late thaw this year, anything but the heavy grief that still lingered like a silent guest in the room. When Emily arrived home, I could tell immediately that she was anxious about something. She hovered in the doorway, her coat still on, eyes bright with a nervous excitement I hadn't seen in a long time. I offered her tea, but she shook her head and remained standing. Elaine and I exchanged curious glances. "Mom, I have some news," Emily said, voice trembling slightly as she fiddled with a loose thread on her sleeve. She took a deep breath. "Brian proposed to me. We're engaged." For a second, I forgot how to breathe. Elaine let out a little gasp of surprise and then immediately rose to embrace Emily with congratulations. The porcelain teacup in my hand rattled on its saucer. "Engaged?" I managed to echo, my tone more stunned than celebratory. Emily's smile wavered as she looked at me. "I know it's sudden," she rushed on, her words tumbling out. "But we love each other, Mom. Brian's been my rock these past few months. I didn't want to say anything while things were so hard after Dad but he asked me last night. He wants to meet you properly, to ask for your blessing." My heart thudded dully. I realized I had met Brian only briefly before. He'd stopped by the house a couple of times to pick up Emily after work in recent months. A polite handshake in the foyer. Some small talk about the weather. That was the extent of our acquaintance. I knew embarrassingly little about the young man who now intended to marry my daughter. All I had were impressions. He was handsome in a clean-cut way with a confident smile almost a shade too smooth. He worked in finance, Emily had mentioned once, though the details were scarce. A vague unease stirred in my chest, but I forced myself to smile and stood up to hug my daughter. That's wonderful news," I said softly into her hair as I held her. Her body was taut as a bowstring, as if she had expected resistance. I felt her slowly relax in my arms. "You caught me by surprise, that's all." I pulled back and cupped her cheek. "If you're happy, I'm happy for you." Relief flooded Emily's eyes, and she released a breath I suspect she'd been holding for days. Elaine was already peppering her with questions. How did he propose? When might the wedding be? And, oh, let's see the ring. My best friend's enthusiasm filled the space where my own faltered. Emily laughed and showed off a modest diamond ring I hadn't even noticed in my shock. It glinted in the afternoon light, a symbol of promises and commitments yet to be fulfilled. "Brian wanted to be here when I told you," Emily said, a hint of apology in her tone as she sat down at last. "But I thought it might be better coming from me first." I'd like to invite him over for dinner this week so you two can really talk. Of course, I replied, reaching for my teacup to give my hand something to do. My mind was already churning. So soon? A worried voice in me whispered. They'd been dating barely a year, if that. And why had she kept him such a secret during the hardest months of our lives? Perhaps she thought I wouldn't approve of any joy amid grief. Perhaps she hadn't wanted to upset me. I swallowed my questions and tried to listen as Emily recounted the romantic picnic where Brian had popped the question, complete with champagne and her favorite tulips. Through it all, I maintained a warm smile, but inside, uneasy thoughts prickled. Elaine caught my eye at one point and gave me a reassuring nod as if to say, "Relax, this is good news." I tried to absorb some of her confidence. Maybe I was just being an overprotective mother. Emily was 27 after all and capable of making her own choices. I told myself that Richard would have been thrilled to see our girl find love. Yet beneath that rational thought, something in my gut twisted uncomfortably. I couldn't put my finger on it. There was no concrete reason to doubt Brian beyond the timing and my own raw state of mind. But the subtle cracks I'd sensed in Emily's demeanor these past weeks, the secret phone calls, the evenings she came home well past midnight with puffy eyes, now took on new meaning. She hadn't been distant out of grief alone. She'd been building a life separate from me, one that I was only now glimpsing. That night, after Emily had gone upstairs, humming with happiness and Elaine had given me a goodbye hug, I lingered in the living room alone. The house was dim, except for the soft glow of a lamp. On the mantel, a cluster of family photos caught my eye, pictures of a younger Emily perched on Richard's shoulders at the beach, or giggling between us on Christmas morning years ago. I wondered what Richard would say about all this. A fresh ache blossomed in my chest, knowing he wasn't here to share in this milestone or to help guide me now. I traced a finger along the framed edge of our last family photo together. "Richard," I whispered into the stillness, "am I doing the right thing?" There was no answer in the silent room, of course. Only the gentle tick of the grandfather clock in the hall accompanied my thoughts. I wanted desperately to be happy for our daughter, to embrace this change. And yet, as I stood there, a strange foreboding crept over me. It was as if the shadows in the corners had grown a little longer, the quiet house holding its breath. I told myself it was just my anxiety talking. I had lost my husband. Of course I was afraid of more change, more loss. Still, I could not shake the instinct that something about this engagement wasn't quite right. That instinct would only grow stronger once I met Brian properly. In fact, it would soon threaten to upend the tenuous peace we had rebuilt. But on that spring afternoon, I pushed aside my misgivings and resolved to give the young man a fair chance, for Emily's sake, and for the hope that this could be a bright spot after so much darkness. Brian came for dinner 2 evenings later on a crisp Friday night when spring rain tapped lightly at the windows. I fussed over the meal preparation more than usual, trying to calm my nerves by perfecting the roast chicken and garlic potatoes. Emily teased me that afternoon for being so domestic. "Mom, it's just dinner, you don't have to go overboard," she laughed, but I could tell she was anxious too. She changed outfits twice before he arrived, and when the doorbell finally rang, she nearly jumped out of her skin. I gave her hand a reassuring squeeze before opening the door. Brian stood on the porch with a bouquet of lilies, Emily's favorite, and a bottle of red wine. The lilies won me over for a moment. They showed he paid attention to what she loved. He greeted me with impeccable politeness. "Mrs. Harper, thank you for having me." His voice was smooth, practiced. Up close, Brian was undeniably charming, tall, clean-shaven, with sharp blue eyes that seemed to shine with confidence. He handed me the wine, a rather expensive Merlot. "I thought this might pair well with dinner," he said. I nodded my thanks and invited him in, trying to quiet the skepticism in my mind. As we settled at the dining table, conversation flowed easily at first. Brian complimented our home, admiring the antique mahogany sideboard in the dining room and the old oil landscape painting above it. "You have wonderful taste," he said, smiling at me. "This painting, is it a Thomas Moran?" It looks original. I was a bit taken aback. He was correct. It was an original Moran that Richard and I had bought at an estate sale years ago. I found myself wondering how a man of Brian's age recognized that. It struck me as an unusual detail to note casually. Emily beamed at him and then at me, clearly pleased that two of the most important people in her life were finally connecting. I tried to join in her warmth. We spoke of simple things. How Emily and Brian met, at a mutual friend's New Year's party, it turned out, and their shared love of hiking. Brian recounted a funny mishap from one of their hikes that made Emily throw her head back in laughter. Watching her laugh like that, so freely, warmed my heart, despite my reservations. For a moment, I allowed myself to hope my misgivings were unfounded, but as the evening wore on, little things kept tugging at me. When I gently asked Brian about his family, he gave a polite but vague answer. His parents had passed away, he said quietly, and he had no close relatives. I offered condolences and saw a flicker in his expression, something like discomfort or impatience that vanished as quickly as it came. I shifted the topic to his work. He launched into an explanation of his job in finance, describing himself as an investment consultant, though his description was short on specifics. He mentioned big projects on the horizon and impressive returns with a confident grin, yet the more he spoke, the less substance I heard. Perhaps I was expecting too much detail, but it felt a bit like listening to a rehearsed speech meant to impress without actually revealing much. At one point, I asked if he'd always planned to stay in Connecticut. His answer was light. "Oh, I go wherever opportunity takes me." He flashed that charming smile. "But now that I have Emily, I feel like I've found where I'm meant to be." He reached over and squeezed her hand on the table, a gesture that made her blush with happiness. Still, I caught an undercurrent of restlessness beneath his polished exterior. It was in the way his eyes occasionally darted around the room when he thought we weren't looking, as if appraising the silver picture frames on the mantel or the china cabinet in the corner. It gave me the uncanny sense that he was sizing up more than just our decor. After dinner, I brought out a homemade cherry pie, and Emily excused herself to make some fresh coffee. As I cut slices in the kitchen, Brian followed to help carry the dishes. We found ourselves briefly alone. He praised the meal and then, in a courteous tone, said, "I want you to know, Mrs. Harper, I absolutely adore your daughter. I promise I'll take good care of her." Up close in the gentle light of the kitchen, I could see a faint scar along his jaw and the earnest look in his eyes as he spoke. I wanted so badly to believe him. "She's my world, Brian," I replied softly, meeting his gaze. "Her happiness means everything to me." I paused, then added carefully, "It's all happening a bit fast. I hope you both will take time to plan things and build a strong foundation." He inclined his head. "Of course." "We're not in a huge rush," he said agreeably. "When you know, you know." Emily returned then with a tray of steaming coffee mugs, and the conversation moved on. We spoke a while longer about possible wedding dates and venues. I offered our garden for an intimate ceremony, but he casually mentioned picturing something more lavish, perhaps a country club affair, before quickly adding that he'd go with whatever made everyone happy. The implication of expensive tastes lingered in my mind. Emily, lost in excited chatter about dresses and flowers, seemed oblivious to any tension. By the time we said our good nights at the door, I was emotionally exhausted. Brian thanked me warmly for the evening, and Emily walked him out to his car, the two of them lingering in a good-night embrace under the porch light. I watched from the front window through a gap in the curtains, my breath fogging the glass. They looked like a picture-perfect couple, yet something in that tableau set my teeth on edge. Emily gazed up at him, completely trusting, her heart on her sleeve, while he held her with an almost practiced charm. When Emily came back inside, cheeks flushed with happiness, I mustered a smile. "He's quite something," I said neutrally, locking the door behind her. Her eyes searched my face. "You really think so?" she asked. There was a plea in her voice. She wanted my approval desperately. I hesitated only a fraction of a second. "He was very polite and thoughtful," I replied. "It's clear he cares about you." I wasn't lying. Those things seemed true. But I couldn't bring myself to shower him with the unreserved praise she was likely hoping for. I began gathering the empty wine glasses from the coffee table to avoid meeting her eyes. Emily was quiet for a moment, shrugging off her coat. "He felt you were a bit distant," she said softly. I told him it's just been hard, you adjusting and all. He understands distant. The word sat between us like a wedge. I set the glasses in the sink, choosing my next words carefully. "Honey, he's practically a stranger to me. I need a little time to get to know him better, that's all." She nodded, but her expression was troubled. "Okay, I get it." She offered me a faint smile and moved to give me a hug. I wrapped my arms around her, plate still in my hands, and patted her back reassuringly. But I could feel the slight tension in her body, the disappointment she tried to hide. That night, long after Emily had gone to bed, I found myself pacing the living room. The house creaked in the silence, and rain whispered against the windows. My mind replayed every detail of the evening. Brian's smooth answers, his wandering eyes, the subtle hints of something amiss that I might have imagined. I tried to chalk it up to an overprotective mother's nerves. Who wouldn't be a little skeptical meeting the man whisking her daughter into a new life? But each time I dismissed one concern, another gnawed at me. I knew something was off. I just didn't know what. And that ignorance gnawed at me. In the stillness, I caught my reflection in the dark window. A middle-aged widow wringing her hands, alone with too many thoughts. I thought of Richard again, wishing I could ask his opinion of Brian, wishing he were here to share the burden of deciding what was best for our daughter. When I finally crawled into bed, I had more questions than answers. One truth settled heavily in my chest. I was not ready to bless this engagement, not until I was convinced Emily wouldn't be hurt. As much as it pained me, I resolved to hold off on giving my blessing, at least for now. I prayed I was wrong about Brian, that my instincts were misfiring due to grief and fear, because if they weren't, a part of me dreaded the storm that would come when I voiced my doubts. I barely slept after that tense dinner. By dawn, my misgivings had hardened into resolve. The next morning, pale sunlight found me at the kitchen table nursing a cold cup of coffee, rehearsing the words I needed to say. My heart ached at the thought of hurting Emily, but I had to speak up. A mother's instinct is a persistent drumbeat, and mine pounded that something was wrong. I hoped I could make her understand without breaking us. Emily came downstairs late, still in her robe, her eyes bright and hopeful. "Good morning," she greeted me, leaning down to kiss my cheek. I caught a hint of Brian's cologne on her. She must have seen him earlier, or the scent lingered from their embrace last night. The reminder steeled my resolve. "Morning, honey," I replied softly. I waited as she poured herself a glass of orange juice and joined me at the table. For a moment, we sat in the gentle quiet of the kitchen, the only sounds the tick of the wall clock and the distant hum of a lawnmower down the street. It felt almost like old times, but not quite. There was an unspoken tension between us, like the taut hush before a thunderstorm. Emily cleared her throat. "So, what did you think of Brian?" Really, her tone was carefully casual, but her fingers tapped lightly against her glass. I took a breath, looking down at my hands. "He's charming," I began, "and clearly loves you. But..." Emily's voice sharpened on that single word. She was always quick to hear the unsaid. I raised my eyes to hers and tried to muster a reassuring smile, but it faltered. "But I still feel like I hardly know him, dear. You two have only been together for a short time. I wonder if maybe you should take things a bit slower. There's no need to rush into a wedding." Her face fell, open and unguarded from a moment of anticipation to a wounded disbelief. "Mom, we're not rushing. We've been dating for almost a year. I understand that, and I know you care for him deeply." I reached out across the table to touch her hand, but she pulled it back to her lap. "It's just that marriage is a huge step. I think it would be wise to have a longer engagement. Perhaps wait another year, get to know each other even better, talk about finances, expectations, Maybe consider a prenuptial agreement, given a prenup? Emily recoiled as if struck. The hurt in her eyes flashed to anger. You think I need a prenup? Because you don't trust Brian or you don't trust me? My throat tightened. This was derailing faster than I'd feared. Sweetheart, this isn't about trust in you. I'm just being practical. Your father and I had one. It's a normal precaution when there are significant assets or family estates involved. It doesn't mean anyone plans for things to go wrong. She stood up, pushing her chair back with a harsh scrape. Unbelievable, she muttered, crossing her arms. This is supposed to be one of the happiest times of my life, Mom. And here you are, already treating it like a business negotiation. Like you expect it to fail, I stood as well, heart pounding. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it like that. Please sit. Let's talk. I reached for her, but she stayed just out of reach. Talk? About how you don't approve of the man I love? Her voice quavered, loud enough to rattle the nerves of the quiet house. Just say it, Mom. You think I'm making a mistake, don't you? I opened my mouth, struggling for gentle words, but only truth came. I'm worried, Emily. Worried that it's all happening so fast that I haven't had a chance to know him. There are things about Brian that I don't have answers to. I don't want you hurt if something about him isn't what it seems. Her eyes brimmed suddenly with tears, but her jaw was set firm. The only thing hurting me right now is you, she said, voice trembling. You have no idea how happy he makes me, how safe I feel with him. After Dad died, I was a mess. Brian was there for me in ways you didn't see because you were drowning in your own grief. She wiped at an angry tear on her cheek. Which I understood, Mom, I really did. I took care of you and everything else without complaint. And now, when I finally find someone to share my life with, you can't even be happy for me? Her words struck like slaps. Guilt and defensiveness warred in my chest. I am grateful for everything you did after your father's death, I whispered. And I do want you to be happy. But I can't shake the feeling that something isn't right. I'm just asking for a little more time, a little caution. You're asking for something you know I won't agree to, she snapped. Because you don't like him. Why can't you just admit it? I pressed fingers to my temple, a dull ache blooming there. Fine, I said quietly. I don't trust him. Not yet. I'm not convinced he's the man you think he is. A stunned silence filled the kitchen. Emily's face went ashen, her lip quivering. When she spoke, her voice was cold. Then I guess there's nothing more to talk about. Fear spiked through me. Emily, wait! No. She shook her head, eyes flashing with a fury I'd never seen from her. If you can't trust my judgment on the most important decision of my life, then what kind of mother are you? Her words were sharp and raw, and they cut deep. I felt as though the floor tilted. I'm a mother who loves you enough to speak up when I'm scared for you, I pleaded. She grabbed her phone and keys from the counter, her movements abrupt. You know what? I don't need this. She started towards the hall. Where are you going? I asked, panic rising. Outside, dark clouds were gathering. When had the morning sun vanished? To Brian's. She paused at the doorway and looked back at me with hurt and anger etched on her face. He at least believes in me and respects my choices. Stay out of our way, Mom. If you won't give us your blessing, we'll just do this without you. Those words, like a final crack of thunder, hung in the air as she stormed out. The front door slammed, rattling the windows. I flinched at the sound. Through the living room window, I saw her car peel away down the street, and I was left in the hollow silence of what had just happened. I sank into a chair, my legs no longer steady. The house seemed to hold its breath in the aftermath. She was gone, truly gone, off to the one person she felt would understand. My sweet daughter, the baby I cradled, and the young woman I cherished now saw me as an enemy of her happiness. I pressed a hand over my mouth to stifle a sob, tears finally coming hot and fast. I wanted to run after her, to apologize, to say I'd try harder to accept him, but a stubborn part of me, the same part that had spoken up in the first place, held me back. I couldn't just take back my worries as if they didn't exist. I couldn't lie and pretend I fully trusted Brian when every fiber of my being screamed caution. As the first thunder rumbled in the distance, I realized the normalcy of our life, our morning chats, and easy laughter had been shattered. Nothing would be the same after this. A line had been drawn between us. I only prayed it wasn't permanent. Outside, the skies finally opened up, rain pounding against the windows. I buried my face in my hands and wept, the storm inside the house echoing the one raging beyond the glass. It was later that same day when the next blow fell. The storm had passed by afternoon, leaving the air heavy and the ground sodden. I drifted through the house in a haze of heartache, checking my phone repeatedly for any word from Emily. None came. In the silence, regret began creeping in. Had I been too harsh? Too unyielding? Each time I thought of her devastated expression as she left, fresh tears pricked my eyes. Toward evening, I sat in Richard's old armchair in the study, clutching one of his sweaters that still faintly smelled of him. The house was dim. I hadn't bothered to turn on many lights. That's when I heard the computer in the corner chime softly, an email notification. Absent-mindedly, I wiped my cheeks and shuffled over, waking the screen. My heart skipped when I saw the sender's name, Emily. For a second, hope flared that she was reaching out to reconcile, but the subject line made my stomach clench. For you. With a growing sense of unease, I clicked on the email. A short message blinked open, the words sharp and spare. You wanted truth, Mom? Here it is. Dad wasn't the man you thought he was. Attached below were several image files. My pulse thundered in my ears as I opened the first attachment. It was a photograph, slightly grainy but unmistakable in its content. Richard, my Richard, sitting on a wooden bench in what looked like our favorite park downtown under the shade of a sycamore. By his side, leaning into him with a familiar intimacy, was Elaine. They weren't quite kissing in this picture, but her head rested on his shoulder and his arm was around her in a way that no mere friend would do. I blinked rapidly, convinced my eyes were betraying me. This had to be a mistake, a cruel Photoshop prank, or some awful misunderstanding. Hands trembling, I opened the second photo. This one was a closer shot, taken indoors, a dim hotel hallway, perhaps. Richard stood with Elaine pressed against the wall, their faces close, his hand gentle on her waist. Elaine's eyes were closed, lips parted as if mid-whisper or mid-kiss. Richard's face was half turned toward her neck. I recoiled from the screen as if burned, a sharp cry ripping from my throat. No! Oh God, no! My voice sounded strangled to my own ears. I fumbled for the desk lamp, snapping it on as if more light would dispel the horror before me. But the images remained, searing into my brain. I forced myself to look again, to examine every detail, searching desperately for an alternate explanation. Perhaps he was comforting her. But no, not even grief could explain away the longing in their bodies, the tenderness in that embrace. My trembling fingers opened one attachment after another, each more damning than the last. Richard and Elaine holding hands across a cafe table, walking arm in arm into a hotel, even captured sharing a furtive kiss under the neon glow of a diner sign. Late at night, each image was a dagger. Together they formed an album of infidelity that I had been too blind to see while my husband was alive. My knees buckled, and I sank into the desk chair, a keening sound rising from deep in my chest. It felt as if the floor had opened up beneath me, swallowing the last remnants of solid ground I stood on. My hand slapped over my mouth, and for a moment I just sat there, shaking uncontrollably, as silent screams echoed inside my head. The air was gone. I couldn't draw a proper breath. I wanted to look away, to unsee every pixel, but I was transfixed by the nightmare unfolding on the screen. I don't know how long I sat, frozen in disbelief. A minute? 10? The world outside that monitor ceased to exist. Then, gradually, rage began to simmer, cutting through the fog of shock. My temples throbbed and a hot, roaring pulse filled my ears. The email's words, "Dad wasn't the man you thought he was," taunted me from the top of the screen. Emily's fury and hurt lay bare in every cruel word and every captured image she'd sent. With a shaking hand, I moved the cursor to reread the line of text in her message. My vision blurred with tears, but I could still make out the bitterness in each letter. A hollow, bitter taste coated my tongue. My own daughter had kept this secret and unleashed it now as a weapon. She'd pulled back the curtain on a betrayal I never even suspected, solely to wound me. And by God, she had succeeded. A surge of nausea swept through me. I barely managed to push the wastebasket closer before retching, my body convulsing with each sob that tore out of me. When the wave passed, I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand, weak and shattered. In a daze, I stood and stumbled toward the wall where a collage of family photos hung. Among them was my wedding portrait with Richard and another of the three of us, Richard, Emily, and me, smiling by the Connecticut shoreline on a summer day. My vision tunneled, rage and anguish twisting together. "How could you?" I whispered to the image of my husband, my fingers grazing over our faces behind the glass. My chest felt too tight, as though barbed wire were cinched around my ribs. Without fully realizing it, I yanked the frame photo off the wall. My hands were trembling so violently that the frame slipped from my grasp. It fell to the hardwood floor with a crash. The glass shattered, shards skittering across the floorboards. For a heartbeat, I stared at the broken picture, the three of us now fragmented behind cracked glass. A keening sob welled up and escaped my lips. I felt as broken as that frame, my cherished memories splintered into pieces too sharp to hold. I sank to my knees amid the glittering shards, heedless of the danger. A sliver of glass bit into my palm, but the physical pain barely registered through the storm inside me. I clutched the photograph itself, freed now from its frame, slicing my thumb on a jagged edge. A bright bead of blood smeared across our printed smiles. It struck me in that moment. Our happiness had been an illusion, and now it was stained and torn just like this picture. A raw howl of grief tore from my throat. Betrayal. The word thundered in my mind. Betrayal by Richard, betrayal by Elaine, and betrayal by my own child who chose the cruelest way to tell me. My sobs came full and ugly then. Years of trust, of friendship, of what I thought was a rock-solid marriage, all of it lay in ruins around me on the floor. Eventually, my sobs subsided into ragged breaths. I became aware of the quiet hum of the computer behind me, the open email casting a pale light into the dim study. The betrayal was right there, illuminated on the screen, undeniable. With a shaky resolve, I stood up, my knees popping in protest, and snatched my phone from the desk. My hands were still bleeding in tiny cuts, but I hardly cared. I had only one impulse surging through me now. I needed to hear my daughter's voice. I needed to understand how she could do this. How long had she known? Why now? A terrible thought flickered through my mind. Had Brian shown her these? Was this his revenge on me as well? Or had Emily discovered this on her own and chosen to hide it until today? I jabbed at her number in my recent calls. It rang. Anne rang. I paced the small study as I waited, glass crunching under my shoes. I didn't even feel the tears still streaming down my face. Finally, after the 6th or 7th ring, she picked up. "Mom," came Emily's voice, flat and tense. I almost collapsed with relief just to hear her, but fury quickly took the reins. "Emily," I managed, though her name came out strangled. What have you done?" My voice trembled, caught between a sob and a shout. A pause crackled over the line. When she replied, her tone was icy. "I sent you the truth. You wanted to protect me from getting hurt? Now you know I'm not the only one who can make mistakes in choosing a partner." I swallowed hard, my throat parched and burning. How could you be so cruel?" I whispered, voice broken. She let out a bitter breath. Cruel? I wasn't the one lying to you for years. Dad was, and Elaine. She nearly spat our friend's name. I thought you deserved to know the kind of deceit that was happening right under your nose while you played the perfect wife. Her words landed like slaps on raw skin. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. When did you find out? I demanded hoarsely. How long have you known about them? Long enough, Emily replied, evasive and sullen. I caught them together a few weeks before Dad got really sick. I confronted him, and he begged me not to tell you. He said it was a mistake, that he'd end it with her. Then he got his diagnosis. And I guess part of me decided to keep his secret so as not to add to your pain. So yeah, I kept it in, even tried to forget it. Her voice wavered, and for an instant I heard the deep hurt beneath her anger. But I never forgave him. I never forgave either of them. My legs gave out, and I sank back onto the edge of the armchair. A fresh wave of pain crashed over me. My daughter had borne this burden alone through her father's illness and death. I struggled to find words, my mind reeling. Emily, you should have told you? She cut me off. Maybe. I almost did so many times, but you were devastated over Dad, and Elaine, she was your rock, wasn't she? Always by your side, how could I rip away the two people you leaned on? I couldn't do that to you when you were barely functioning. My free hand covered my eyes as hot tears squeezed out. Each of her words was an indictment and a confession all at once. So why now? I choked out. Why tell me like this in such a horrible way? This time her silence was long. Because I'm tired, Mom, she said at last, voice cracking. Tired of you acting like you know what's best for me. Tired of you judging my choices from some moral high ground that doesn't exist. You didn't even know what was happening in your own marriage, with your best friend under your roof. And yet you presume to tell me who's worthy of my love? It's hypocrisy. I was not judging you. I tried to protest, but she steamrolled on. You were, though. You are. You think Brian's using me or something, don't you? That I'm too naive to see it. Well, maybe I learned something about lies and betrayal watching Dad. I can promise you, Brian has been nothing but honest with me. He loves me, and I won't let you ruin that because you can't trust anyone anymore. Her accusation lanced through me. My hand shook on the phone. Emily, I'm sorry, I whispered, unsure what I was apologizing for exactly, doubting her, failing her, or everything all at once. There was a soft sound on her end, perhaps a muffled sob quickly smothered. When she spoke again, her tone was flat with exhaustion. I'm done talking about this. You wanted the truth, now you have it. We both lost Dad in more ways than one. And honestly, right now, I don't want to see you. Her words hit like a punch to the gut, leaving me breathless. Please don't say that, I begged. I have to go, she replied, emotionless. In a panic, I blurted, Emily, wait. What about us? Please, The line clicked dead. She was gone. I lowered the phone, staring at it in disbelief. The silence that followed was enormous, broken only by the faint buzz of the disconnected call. My hand fell limply to my side, the phone slipping from my fingers onto the carpet with a dull thud. A cold clarity washed over me then, cutting through the haze of tears. The truth was out, and it had wrecked what little remained of my family. Emily's fury was justified in her eyes. In lashing out at me, she'd wielded the most hurtful weapon she had, and I had forced her hand with my own stubbornness. Fresh tears blurred my vision, but beneath the grief an ember of indignation glowed. Richard and Elaine, how dare they, and how dare Elaine continue to comfort me, to stand by my side at the funeral like a devoted friend, all the while knowing what she'd done. An acidic mix of anger and heartbreak churned inside me. I stood on unsteady feet, wiping my tear-streaked face with the back of my hand. A mirror hung on the study wall above the desk, and I caught sight of myself in it. Hair disheveled, eyes red-rimmed and wild, a thin line of blood trickling from one of the small cuts on my palm. In that reflection, I saw a woman undone by betrayal, but also a woman suddenly fueled by resolve. I had heard Emily's truth. Now I needed to hear Elaine's. Somehow I found myself grabbing my car keys from the hook by the kitchen door, adrenaline overriding exhaustion and pain. Dusk was falling outside, the world tinted in the deep blue of twilight. I hardly remembered getting into the car or backing out of the driveway. My focus narrowed to one destination: Elaine's house, just a 10-minute drive away. As I drove through the quiet neighborhood streets, streetlights flickering on one by one, I felt a dangerous calm settle over me. Betrayal had hollowed me out today, but in that emptiness, a singular determination took root. I deserved an explanation. I deserved an apology, anything that might make sense of this senseless hurt. My tires crunched on the gravel of Elaine's driveway before I realized I'd even arrived. Her cozy bungalow looked serene, a warm light glowing in the living room window, as if nothing at all were amiss, as if its occupant hadn't helped destroy my family. I killed the engine and sat there for a second, gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles were bone white. My heart thundered with a chaotic blend of anger and dread. How do you confront decades of friendship turned betrayal? There would be no perfect way. So I chose the direct one. I stepped out into the cool evening air, blood still dried on my palm, the pain now a dull throb. Before I could second-guess myself, I marched up the stone path and rang the doorbell with a trembling finger. Inside, I heard the muffled chime echo, and then footsteps. Each step closer made my pulse pound. The door opened, and there stood Elaine, her familiar face breaking into a soft smile that froze the instant she saw me. "Maggie," she said, surprise and concern mingling in her voice. "Are you okay?" "You look—" I couldn't contain it a second longer. The dam of my restraint broke. "How could you?" I burst out, my voice raw and shaking. Elaine's eyes widened in alarm. She opened her mouth to respond, but I didn't let her. With tears spilling anew, I stepped forward onto the threshold, holding up the crumpled, blood-smeared photo of Richard, Emily, and me that I'd unconsciously carried from the house. "How could you do this to us?" I cried, thrusting the picture toward her. Her gaze dropped to the torn photograph in my hand, and in an instant, all color drained from her face. She recognized it. She understood. Her lips parted, but no sound came. I stood there quivering, chest heaving with grief and fury, waiting for answers as the night settled around us. For a long moment, neither of us moved. I stood trembling on Elaine's doorstep as the twilight deepened, my accusation hanging in the air. Elaine stared at the crumpled photograph in my outstretched hand, the evidence of her betrayal, and her face contorted with shock and guilt. "Maggie," she finally breathed, my nickname shaky on her lips. "I can explain." An ugly, bitter laugh escaped me. "Explain?" I spat, my voice breaking. "Please. I would love to hear some explanation for how my best friend could crawl into bed with my husband." Elaine flinched as if I had struck her. She glanced around nervously and stepped back. "Come inside. Please. The neighbors—" "I don't give a damn about the neighbors," I snapped. But I did step over the threshold, driven by a need for answers that overrode all else. I slammed the door shut behind me. The familiar scent of vanilla candles in her foyer made my stomach churn. How many times had I smelled that same comforting scent here, never knowing what secrets festered beneath our friendship? Elaine wrung her hands, eyes shiny with tears. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, this confident, vivacious woman reduced to a pale wraith. "I never meant for you to find out like this," she said softly. I let out a sharp bark of disbelief. "That's what you're sorry for? That I found out?" "God, Elaine," my voice rose in a crescendo of pain. "After everything, after all those nights you held my hand and swore we'd get through losing him, you were lying to my face?" Her composure broke at that. Tears spilled down her cheeks. "I was going to tell you," she cried. "So many times I tried, Maggie, but then Richard got sick and my fury surged." "And what?" And you decided to keep sleeping with him as some kind of twisted comfort while I was arranging his doctor's appointments? While I sat beside him believing I was the loving wife and you my devoted friend? My words were acid. My words were acid. Each one made her flinch anew. No, Elaine protested, reaching out as if to touch my arm. I jerked away, and she clasped her hands to her chest instead. It wasn't like that. It started before we knew he was ill. Just a few months before, I swear. We never meant to hurt you. The word cut through me. How long? I demanded through clenched teeth. How long had it been going on? Elaine swallowed hard. 6 months, she whispered. It started last spring, and ended when he got the diagnosis. He broke it off. He said he loved you and that he'd made a terrible mistake. A strangled sound tore from my throat. Richard's pledges of love felt like ashes now. A mistake, I repeated hollowly. You call half a year of deception a mistake? She shook her head frantically. I know it sounds unforgivable. It was unforgivable. I have no excuse, Maggie, except that I was lonely and vulnerable and what? He wasn't dead yet, so you thought you'd sample life as his wife? The viciousness of my own words surprised even me, but I couldn't stop. Every part of me was burning. We trusted you. I trusted you, Elaine. You were like a sister to me, and all the while you were betraying that trust in the worst way imaginable. By now, Elaine was sobbing openly. I'm sorry, she keened, a voice high with anguish. I'm so sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. Richard and I, it just happened. We didn't plan it. We leaned on each other. And one night, I put up a hand, shaking my head violently. Spare me the details. My stomach roiled at the thought of the two of them leaning on each other. You know what hurts the most? I confided in you. I cried on your shoulder about how scared I was of losing him, and you were with him all that time. How could you look me in the eye? How could you hug me knowing what you did? Elaine stepped forward, desperation in her eyes. Because I hated myself for it, she burst out. Every single day, Maggie, I hated myself. I told him we had to tell you, but then he got sick, and I was a coward. I told myself you didn't need that pain on top of everything else. I barked out another humorless laugh, dashing away the hot tears on my face with the back of my hand. So you did it for me? How noble I was, trembling from head to toe, anger and heartbreak warring within me. She shook her head. No, yes, I don't know. I was trying to justify the unjustifiable. After he ended it, I thought maybe it could just be our secret, that it would die with him and you'd never have to know. I thought I could live with it, to preserve our friendship, to keep you from that hurt. Something snapped in me then. I closed the distance between us, my voice dropping to a dangerous calm. You don't get to decide what hurts me or what I know, I said, each word like ice. You don't get to take away my truth under the guise of sparing me. You already took away enough, Elaine. She was shaking her head, murmuring apologies through her tears. If I could undo it, I would. I would give anything to go back and stop myself. But you can't. I cut her off, my tone final. The fight drained out of me, leaving a cold clarity. I realized I didn't have any forgiveness in me. Not now, maybe not ever. You slept with my husband. You lied to me for months, years. And even after he died, you looked me in the eye and pretended to mourn him with me, pretended to be my support. How dare you? Elaine opened her mouth, but no words came out. She simply wept, reaching toward me with trembling hands that I refused to take. You were my best friend, I whispered, voice raw. I loved you like family, but you've destroyed every good memory I have of Richard and of us. My throat tightened around a sob. Was any of it real? Were you secretly laughing at me all those years? No. Never, she gasped. Maggie, please believe me. I never stopped caring about you. I never, ever wanted to laugh at you. I was weak and stupid and selfish, but I loved you always. I closed my eyes, the word loved ringing hollow. Loved me, yet slept with my husband behind my back. There was a time I would have believed anything Elaine said. Those days were gone. When I opened my eyes again, I found a strange calm descending over me. My cheeks were wet, my body exhausted from shaking, but my voice came out quiet and steady. I don't think there's anything left to say. Your actions killed our friendship, Elaine. You killed it as surely as if you ran a knife through it. She drew in a sharp breath as though I had indeed stabbed her. Please, please don't say that. I turned away, reaching for the front door. I couldn't stand to be in that house another second. The very air felt suffocating and tainted by lies. I can't do this, I said, my hand on the knob. I can't look at you. Maggie, Elaine rushed toward me. Don't go like this. Let me try to make it right. I whirled on her one final time, a lifetime of friendship and betrayal reflected in my eyes. You can't make it right. We're done. Her face crumpled as if I'd slapped her. I stepped out onto the porch, into the cool night air, and pulled the door closed behind me with a resolute click. Outside, dusk had melted into true night. I stood on her porch for a moment, breathing hard as if I'd run a marathon. My chest hurt, physically hurt, as though my heart itself had been bruised. Through the door, I could still hear her sobbing, a sound that might have once broken my heart. Now, it echoed emptily. I walked to my car in a daze. The adrenaline that had carried me here seeped away, leaving only hollow ache in its wake. As I sank into the driver's seat, a wave of exhaustion nearly overtook me. I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and let out a shuddering breath. It was done. Elaine was out of my life, by my own words. A part of me couldn't believe what I'd just done, what she had done to bring us to this moment. I had lost my husband, my daughter, and now my closest friend. The trifecta of betrayal was complete. A numbness settled over me as I started the engine. I drove home on autopilot. The streets empty and dark. When I finally arrived, the house greeted me with silence and shadows. I locked the door behind me and simply stood in the foyer, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. I had no more tears at that moment, only a heavy emptiness. Some betrayals cleave your life cleanly into a before and after. Stepping into my silent house, I knew I had firmly entered the after, and I was utterly alone in it. The weeks after my confrontation with Elaine passed in a numb haze. I drifted through summer like a ghost in my own life. Each morning I woke to an empty house and went through rote motions, brewing coffee I scarcely drank, listlessly tending the garden simply because I didn't know what else to do with myself. The phone remained dreadfully silent. I'd stare at it for long minutes, willing it to ring with Emily's name, but it never did. In those lonely weeks, grief became my familiar companion. But it was a new kind of grief, heavier in some ways than even Richard's death. I mourned not only the loss of him as I had imagined him, devoted and faithful, but also the loss of Elaine's friendship, and worst of all, the loss of my relationship with my daughter. I had never felt such isolation. At times I wondered bleakly if perhaps I had deserved this fate, left alone with the bitter fruits of truth. I tried to occupy my mind. I cleared out the attic, sorted through old boxes of photos and mementos. That exercise quickly turned into torment. Every photo of Richard's smiling face felt like a lie, each memory with Elaine a mocking reminder. I ended up shoving those pictures into a box and exiling it to the back of a closet, unable to bear their gaze. If anyone had looked in on me during those days, they would have found a woman hollowed out, moving like an automaton in a museum of broken memories. One warm July afternoon, I forced myself out of the house for a walk to the town center, just to prove I still could. Families were out enjoying the sun, children eating ice cream, couples holding hands. The normalcy of life going on was both comforting and cruel. I felt invisible among them. It was then that I saw an acquaintance. Linda Murray, a neighbor from 3 streets over, coming out of the post office. She hesitated when she saw me, an uncomfortable look passing over her face. Perhaps she'd heard some whisper of the falling out between Emily and me. Our town had a way of circulating news quietly. After a moment, she offered a polite smile and greeting. We made stilted small talk about the weather, then Linda cleared her throat and said gently, I heard Emily got married last month. I wasn't sure if I should send a card. I didn't see you at the ceremony. My stomach clenched. This was how I learned, not from my daughter, but secondhand from a well-meaning neighbor. I managed to nod, my face burning. It was a small affair, I replied stiffly, throat tight. No ceremony to speak of. Linda's sympathetic eyes told me she sensed more, but she simply said, "Oh, I see. Well, give her my congratulations if you speak to her, will you?" I murmured something noncommittal, and we parted. I barely made it back home before collapsing onto the sofa in racking sobs. She'd married him. My little girl had become a bride without her mother by her side. I pictured her in a simple dress, perhaps at City Hall or maybe on some quiet beach. Visions that cut me to the core. I cried until no tears remained, mourning yet another loss I hadn't been there for. After that day, I couldn't bear running into any more pitying faces. I retreated deeper into my solitude. To keep myself from going mad, I turned to tasks that demanded focus. Repainting the backyard fence, organizing Richard's garage workbench until every tool was aligned just so. Physical exhaustion became my refuge. If I tired out my body, perhaps my mind would have no strength to conjure memories or regrets when I collapsed into bed. Summer rolled into early autumn. The trees along our street began to flush with color again, reminding me of that tumultuous spring when all of this began. One crisp evening, I found myself sitting at the dining room table with a stack of legal papers, my will, and estate documents. Countless times I'd opened and closed the folder, wrestling with what to do. The anger in me insisted I remove Emily as my beneficiary entirely. She had chosen to ruin her father's image and abandon me when I'd only tried to protect her. Part of me wanted to leave everything to charity out of spite, but each time I lifted the pen, my heart faltered. She was still my daughter, my only child. Cutting her off completely felt like severing the last limb of a tree already struck by lightning. In the end, I couldn't bring myself to sign those changes yet. I set the papers aside, unresolved, and poured myself a glass of wine instead. In quieter moments, when I wasn't consumed by anger or chores, worry gnawed at me. I rarely permitted myself to think of Emily at length. It hurt too much. But late at night, I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering how she was. Was she truly happy with Brian? Had I been wrong about him all along? Or did she ever lie in the dark, missing me the way I missed her? I refused to ask anyone in town for news. Pride and shame held me back. Instead, I succumbed to occasionally checking her social media pages, an exercise that was equal parts comfort and punishment. Over the summer, she had posted a few photos from a brief honeymoon trip to Cape Cod, her smiling face pressed against Brian's on a sunny beach, the ocean behind them. She looked radiant, if a bit thinner than before. Brian's smile in the photo struck me as the same easy grin he'd worn at our dinner. It made my chest ache. As the weeks went on, I noticed the frequency of her posts dwindled. By September, there were no new photos of the two of them at all. Her updates became scarce and oddly impersonal. Song lyrics about heartbreak, a quote about disappointment, nothing explicitly about her marriage. But I could read between the lines. In one picture she shared of herself at a friend's gathering, I noted her left hand was tucked subtly out of view. It could have been coincidence, but my mind immediately wondered if she'd already stopped wearing her wedding ring. That realization brought me no satisfaction, only a deeper worry. Had my worst fears come true? Had Brian hurt or betrayed her somehow? The idea of Emily suffering in any way cut through all my defenses, stirring an urge to reach out. Yet every time I picked up the phone to call her, my courage failed. I would set the phone down, telling myself that if she wanted to talk to me, she would call. I had made my position clear. I had effectively told her she wasn't welcome unless she left him, and she had chosen him, at least then. So I waited, caught between hope and dread. Each day I checked the mail and email, half expecting some message from her, good or bad, anything. but there was nothing. One golden October afternoon, I went out to rake the first fall leaves blanketing the yard. The air smelled of smoke from a distant bonfire, and the sun was low and gentle. I tried to appreciate the moment. Autumn had always been my favorite season, but my heart was not in it. As I heaped brittle maple leaves into bags, I caught myself glancing down the road as I had so many times, wondering if a familiar car might suddenly appear. It never did. That night, I left the porch light on, as I'd done every night since spring. It was a foolish, sentimental habit. Some stubborn part of me wanted Emily to know that. Should she ever drive up that street, home was still open to her. A light in the darkness, waiting. Every night I turned it on at dusk, and every night I locked the door and went to bed alone when she didn't come. On one of those nights, as a chill October rain tapped at the roof, I stood by the living room window, phone in hand. I had pulled up Emily's number again. 1,000 thoughts swirled. What if she was miserable? What if she felt she couldn't come to me after all that's happened? I had been so harsh and so unyielding. Yes, she had hurt me deeply. Deeply enough that I'd considered disinheriting her. But I still loved her. And I was terrified that my pride might have cost me my only child's trust forever. Lightning flickered in the distance, and I realized my hands were shaking. I set the phone down on the coffee table and sank into the armchair, rubbing my temples. The only thing worse than my anger was this incessant worry. I closed my eyes and whispered into the empty room, "Please be okay, Emily. Please be okay." It was half prayer, half plea spoken to whoever might be listening in the silence. The rain fell steadily as night deepened. I was about to push myself up from the armchair and head to bed when a sound jolted me, a faint thump over the patter of rain. I held my breath. Another thump, more insistent. Someone was knocking on my front door. My heart leapt into my throat. It was nearly midnight. Unexpected visitors at this hour were unheard of in our quiet neighborhood. For a moment, a surge of irrational fear coursed through me. Who could it be? But almost as quickly, a wild hope ignited. I grabbed my phone and hurried to the foyer, my pulse thrumming. Through the beveled glass of the front door, I could see the diffuse glow of the porch light haloing a figure. I fumbled with the lock and opened the door, a gust of cold, wet air rushing in. There, on the stoop in the rain, stood Emily. I blinked, thinking I must be dreaming, but it was her. Drenched and shivering, one small suitcase by her feet, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. The porch light illuminated her face, and what I saw made my breath catch. She looked pale and exhausted, cheeks hollowed, eyes red-rimmed and brimming with tears. For a heartbeat, neither of us spoke. We simply stared at each other through a curtain of falling rain. She was the first to break the silence. "Mama," the word slipped out of her. Half sob, half whisper, an echo of childhood she hadn't called me in years. That single word shattered any remaining walls inside me. I crossed the threshold in an instant and threw my arms around her, rain and all. She collapsed against me, trembling violently. Her cold face pressed into my shoulder. "I'm here," I murmured over and over, not even aware of the tears streaming down my own face. "I'm here, baby. I'm here." She clung to me as if she might drown, her fingers digging into the back of my sweater. I could feel the sobs she fought to suppress, her body shaking with each one. After a moment, I pulled back just enough to usher her inside. "Come in, you're soaked," I managed, guiding her over the threshold. I grabbed the suitcase with one hand and shut the door against the storm with the other. Emily stood in the foyer, dripping onto the rug, her gaze cast down as if unsure of her welcome now that she was actually here. She wore jeans and a thin sweater, entirely inadequate for the chilly rain, and both were plastered to her skin. Her dark hair hung limp, water pooling at her feet. Wordlessly, I slipped off my cardigan and wrapped it around her shoulders. She accepted it, teeth chattering. Up close, I noticed a purple discoloration at the corner of her jaw, partly hidden in the shadows. My stomach clenched. Was that a bruise? I reached up instinctively, lightly touching the swollen spot. Emily winced and drew back, quickly raising a hand to cover it. Our eyes met, and she opened her mouth to speak, but her voice broke on a ragged inhale. That faint spark of anger I'd held on to, the remnants of my wounded pride, flickered out at the sight of her despair. Nothing mattered in that instant, except that my child was home and hurt. "Oh, Emily," I whispered, my voice thick with ache. Her face crumpled. I didn't know where else to go," she choked out, tears spilling. "You're home now," I assured her softly. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders, drawing her toward the living room. "Come, let's get you warm." I settled her on the couch and hurried to fetch blankets and a towel. My hands shook with adrenaline and worry as I retrieved them. Back in the living room, I gently draped a towel around her head and began to blot the rainwater from her hair like I used to when she was little. She closed her eyes, silent tears slipping down her cheeks. Once I'd wrapped her in a dry blanket, I knelt in front of her and took her cold hands in mine. There was so much I wanted to say, a torrent of apologies and fears and questions, but I bit them back. This was not the moment for any of that. She was here, and she was hurting. That was all I needed to know for now. We sat in silence for a long while. The only sounds were the steady drumming of rain on the roof and our mingled breathing. I watched her, my heart breaking at how defeated she looked. This wasn't the confident, headstrong young woman who had stormed out of my kitchen months ago. This was a child seeking refuge, carrying a sorrow I hadn't yet identified. Finally, when I felt her shivering subside a bit under the blanket, I spoke softly. "Emily, are you hurt anywhere else? Do we need to go to a hospital?" She shook her head quickly, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "No, I'm not hurt like that. She touched the bruise at her jaw gingerly. "It's not as bad as it looks." A flash of anger flared in me, hot and protective. "Did Brian do that to you?" I asked, trying and failing to keep my voice even. Her chin trembled. She didn't answer immediately, but her silence was telling. At last she whispered, "It was an accident. He didn't mean to. We were arguing," and he grabbed my arm. I pulled away and I fell against the door. I closed my eyes, swallowing down the urge to rage. Accident or not, the result was on her face. But I knew railing against him now wouldn't help her. I forced my hands to unclench and gently squeezed hers. "All right," I said quietly. "All right." She broke down then. You were right, Mom," she sobbed softly. "About everything. About him. I was so stupid." "Shh. No." I hushed, moving to sit beside her and enveloping her in my arms once more. "We'll have time for all that later. You're here now. That's what matters." She buried her face in my shoulder, her tears hot against my skin. I held her tighter, rocking just slightly as if she were a child again. "I'm sorry," she kept repeating in a small, broken voice. "I'm so sorry, Mom. I'm sorry." Each apology felt like a little knife of guilt. I stroked her damp hair. "I'm sorry, too," I whispered. And I was. Sorry for the harsh words we'd hurled. Sorry for the lost months we could never get back. Sorry for the pain that had driven her away in the first place. We stayed like that for a long time, tangled in each other's arms, pouring out months of sorrow in muffled cries and whispers. Outside, the storm thundered and the rain fell harder, but inside that living room, a different storm, the one between us, began slowly to calm. Eventually, her sobs quieted. She drew back, wiping her swollen eyes. "I left him," she said, voice raw but determined. "Tonight, I couldn't take it anymore. The lies, the debt, him yelling. I just grabbed some things and left." A mixture of grief and relief swelled in my chest. "You did the right thing," I murmured. I brushed a strand of wet hair from her forehead. "I'm proud of you for coming here." She looked at me with wide, bloodshot eyes, clearly expecting anger or judgment. Finding none, her lip quivered. "I thought you hated me," she admitted in a cracked whisper. "After what I did, to Dad's memory, to you, I thought I was dead to you." A pained sound escaped my throat. Oh, Emily, no. I was hurt and angry, yes, but I could never hate you. You're my daughter. My heart could never let you go, even when my head was screaming at me too. She broke into another wave of tears at that, and I held her again, murmuring soothing words I can't even recall. All that mattered was that she was here, in my arms, seeking comfort that I was only too ready to give. At some point past midnight, we migrated from the couch to the floor in front of the sofa, wrapped together in a cocoon of blankets. She curled against me, exhausted, her head on my shoulder as I leaned against the couch. I rubbed her back in slow circles like I used to when she was a toddler. In the fragile quiet, she began to talk, haltingly at first, then with a flood of pent-up anguish. She told me about the past months with Brian, how he had charmed her at first with promises and affection, but how things quickly soured after their rushed wedding. How he'd accrued debts she hadn't known about, and pressured her to ask me for money, which she refused to do. How he grew cold and distant when he realized my financial support was gone, spending more nights out and coming home smelling of whiskey. She admitted there were other women too, flirtations at first, then likely more, though she spared me the details. The bruise on her jaw was the first time anything had gotten physical, she added quickly, as if to defend him, or perhaps to reassure me. But it was also the last straw for her. She'd packed a bag and walked out while he was still shouting apologies and excuses. As I listened to her quietly spill every painful detail, my own tears fell silently. Anger burned in me at Brian, at how he'd treated my precious girl, but I also felt an immense guilt. Emily had been living a nightmare, partly out of spite toward me, and now the nightmare had come true. I had been right about him, but being right gave me no satisfaction, only heartbreak. By the time her story wound down, she was utterly spent, her voice a cracked whisper. I realized she was apologizing again, this time for the photo she had sent me. I wanted to hurt you, she said, voice muffled against my shoulder. I was so angry and I knew it would hurt you. I'm sorry. You didn't deserve that I closed my eyes, absorbing the remorse in her tone. That wound still ached inside me, but tonight was not the time to dissect it. You were hurting too, I answered softly. We both said and did things out of pain. I forgive you, Emily. She looked up at me, searching my face. How can you? After what I did, I managed a sad smile and kissed her forehead. Because I'm your mother. And because holding on to that anger will only hurt us both more. The truth was, the betrayal still seared, but I meant what I said. I loved her more than I hated what she'd done. Perhaps I had come to understand in these lonely months the desperate places grief and anger can drive a person. Hadn't I contemplated cutting her out of my will, out of my life in my own rage? We had both been at the brink. She wrapped her arms around me in a fierce hug then, and we cried together, quietly, this time not from pain alone, but from the relief of being reunited. It was very late, nearly morning, when exhaustion finally overtook Emily. Curled up beside me on the floor, she fell into a fitful sleep, her fingers still clutching my sleeve as if afraid I'd vanish. I stayed awake a while longer, watching the soft rise and fall of her breathing, grateful beyond measure for this fragile peace between us. As I listened to the slowing rain, I realized that the porch light was still on, casting a muted glow through the front windows. I had left it lit in hope, and against all odds, that hope had brought my daughter home. I closed my eyes and whispered a thank you to whatever powers might be listening. Despite all the heartbreak and mistakes, my little girl was back under my roof, safe in my arms. Come what may, we would face it together now. I woke up to pale morning light filtering through the living room curtains. For a disorienting second, I thought I'd dreamed everything that had happened, but the weight resting against my side and the blanket tangled around us told me otherwise. Emily was still curled up next to me on the floor, her head on my shoulder. Sometime in the early dawn hours, we must have both drifted into a deep, exhausted sleep right there on the rug. My body protested as I gently shifted, a dozen stiff joints reminding me I wasn't so young anymore. But I didn't mind the discomfort. My daughter was safe in my arms. Nothing else mattered. I studied her sleeping face in the soft light. She looked younger in sleep, like the little girl I used to sneak peeks at in the mornings after she'd crawled into my bed during thunderstorms. Her eyelashes were still damp, crescents against her cheeks, but the lines of worry and pain on her face had eased, at least for now. Careful not to wake her, I eased out from under her head and propped a pillow in my place. She stirred but settled again, burrowing into the pillow. For a moment, I simply watched her breathe, my heart swelling with a fragile peace I hadn't felt in a long time. In the kitchen, I quietly put on a pot of coffee. As it percolated, I caught a glimpse of myself in the window above the sink, a reflection of a woman who had been through the ringer, hair mussed, eyes puffy, and red-rimmed. And yet, beneath the exhaustion, I saw relief. I allowed myself a small, grateful smile. The aroma of coffee must have roused Emily because a few minutes later I heard the floorboards creak. I turned to see her standing in the archway of the kitchen, wrapped in the blanket from last night. Her hair was tousled and her eyes wary, as if she, too, wasn't sure what new reality this morning might bring. "Good morning," I said softly, holding out a hand to her. She managed a faint smile in return. "Morning," she replied, her voice hoarse from all the tears and lack of sleep. I beckoned her closer and she came, sliding into my arms for a hug that I hoped felt as reassuring in daylight as it had in the dark. I pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "How did you sleep?" "Better than I have in a long time," she admitted quietly. "Coffee?" I offered. "Please." We settled at the small kitchen table, 2 steaming mugs between us. Outside the window, the rain had stopped, leaving everything looking freshly washed and sparkling in the early sun. For a while, we sat in a comfortable silence, sipping slowly. It felt almost normal, almost like those gentle weekend mornings we used to share before our worlds splintered. But there were still shadows in Emily's eyes, and I knew there were in mine as well. After all that had happened, a certain heaviness lingered between us. Not an unbearable one, but the kind that comes after a storm, surveying the damage and wondering how to rebuild. Her gaze drifted around the kitchen, taking in each familiar detail as if it were both alien and dear. Her eyes paused on the collection of framed family photos I kept atop the sideboard at the far end of the kitchen, snapshots of holidays and celebrations long past. One in particular, a photo of Richard, Emily, and me laughing together at our college graduation, caught her attention. I saw her face tighten subtly. I followed her gaze to the photo. Richard's arm was around both of us in that picture, our smiles radiant with pride and happiness. It might as well have been a lifetime ago. Emily's fingers curled around her mug. I took that one with me," she said softly, indicating the graduation photo. "When I left last night, it was in my suitcase." Her eyes dropped to the table. "I wanted to keep at least one good memory." My throat constricted. "Of course you did," I murmured. I hadn't even noticed the frame was missing. That she had thought to save it amid her flight from Brian told me so much about the pain and conflict she'd been carrying. We both fell silent again. The subject of Richard hung unspoken in the air, as surely as if his ghost were standing in the doorway. For months, we had avoided speaking his name to each other, first because of grief, then because of anger and shame. But now it felt as though we couldn't move forward without acknowledging the final specter between us. Emily cleared her throat gently. "Mom, are you okay if we talk about Dad?" Her voice was tentative, and I realized she was bracing for my reaction. I reached across the table to take her hand. "Yes," I answered, and I meant it. A pang of sorrow went through me, but I met her eyes steadily. "I think we should." She nodded, swallowing. "I know I opened up a wound when I sent you those pictures," she said. "A wound about him that maybe you weren't ready to see. And I never really got to talk to you about it after everything blew up." She was picking at an invisible thread on the blanket around her shoulders, a nervous habit. I gently squeezed her hand. Neither of us were ready then, I said softly. But maybe we are now. Emily's eyes shimmered with tears she was trying to hold back. I'm so sorry, Mom, she whispered. I'm sorry I kept what I knew about Dad from you and that I threw it at you out of spite. You loved him so much, and you didn't deserve to find out like that. Fresh hurt pricked at my heart, but I pushed through it. I forgive you, I replied, stroking the back of her hand with my thumb. I think, in a way, you saved me from living in an illusion. It hurt, God, it hurt, but at least now I know the truth. She wiped her eyes with the corner of the blanket. Do you hate him now? Dad. I looked again at the photo on the sideboard, at those laughing faces frozen in a happy moment. I let out a slow breath. I don't know, I admitted. I hate what he did. I hate the lies. Sometimes I feel so angry at him I could scream. Other times, I just miss the man I thought he was. The man he also was in so many ways, even if he had this terrible flaw. My voice trembled, despite my effort to keep it steady. Emily nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks now. I've been so angry at him too, she confessed. When I first caught him with Elaine, I was furious. I felt like my whole childhood was a lie, but then he got sick and I had to push it aside. I didn't know how to feel. I still don't. Even now, her words mirrored my own turmoil more than she knew. It's complicated, I said softly. He was a good father to you. And for a long time, he was a good husband to me. At least I believe he was. Those memories, those years, they're real. And I treasure them still. But there's also the betrayal, reconciling those two truths. I haven't managed it yet. A silence fell as we grappled with the duality of love and betrayal. The coffee in our mugs had grown cold. Finally, Emily took a shaky breath. Maybe we need to say goodbye to him properly. Together, I glanced at her, eyebrows raised in question. She bit her lip, then clarified. Maybe we should visit Dad's grave. I haven't been since the funeral, not after I found out. I was too angry. And I know you haven't been going either, not since I sent you the photos. She looked at me apologetically, as if seeking permission for the observation. She wasn't wrong. After learning of Richard's infidelity, I hadn't been able to bring myself to visit his resting place. The thought of standing at his grave, talking to a man I no longer fully knew, had been unbearable. I think you might be right, I said quietly after a moment. Maybe we do need to say goodbye, or at least find some closure. Emily squeezed my hand. Will you come with me? I don't think I can face it alone. I stood up from my chair and moved to her side, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. Of course I will. We sat there holding each other, the decision made. Outside, the first hints of sun broke through the lingering clouds shining down on our little town. It seemed fitting, as if the sky itself approved of our step toward healing the last open wound. Later that morning, we prepared to visit Richard's grave together. The sky had cleared to a pale blue. The earlier storm rinsed away, leaving the world looking clean and new. It felt like a small blessing, as if we were being given a gentle day for this hard task. Emily insisted on stopping by her old childhood room to change out of her rumpled clothes. While she did, I took the opportunity to quickly tidy myself as well. I showered and dressed in a simple black sweater and jeans, appropriate for a cemetery visit, but not so formal as funeral attire. This wasn't a ceremony, just a quiet moment we needed to share. Before we left, I went to the backyard garden and cut a few stems of Richard's favorite flowers, yellow roses. He used to bring me yellow roses for every anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on me, but it still felt right to bring them. When I returned inside, I found Emily in the living room. She had changed into fresh clothes, a somber gray blouse and dark slacks borrowed from my closet since she hadn't packed much. She was holding the graduation photo frame in her hands, the one she'd taken with her. The glass was cracked from being hastily stuffed into her suitcase. I thought maybe we could take this to him, she said quietly when she noticed me. I know it's silly, but maybe he should have it. Emotions swelled in my chest. I nodded. I think that's a lovely idea. We drove to the cemetery in my car. The engine's hum filled the silence between us as we wound through familiar streets toward Greenlawn Cemetery on the edge of town. Emily sat with the framed photo in her lap and the bundle of yellow roses on top of it, her fingers tracing the cracked glass. I occasionally glanced over. Her profile was pensive, brows drawn as if steeling herself. My own stomach fluttered with nerves. It had been nearly a year since I last visited the grave. In that time, my feelings toward Richard had transformed so drastically, I wasn't sure what I would feel standing there today. Anger, sorrow, regret, love, perhaps all of it. As we turned onto the shady lane that led into the cemetery, Emily reached over and found my hand on the gear shift. She squeezed it. I squeezed back, offering a small, reassuring smile. We passed the wrought iron gates and rolled slowly along the winding path lined with old oaks and maples. Golden leaves scattered across the green lawns and among the headstones. A few other visitors were about, tending graves or walking slowly, lost in memories. We parked near the back section where Richard was buried. For a moment, we remained sitting in the car, neither of us quite ready to move. My heart had begun to pound against my ribs. Emily inhaled deeply. "Ready?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. I nodded, even though a part of me felt anything but ready. Ready. We stepped out into the crisp autumn air. I retrieved the roses and the photo frame, and together we walked down the familiar row of headstones. Emily's grip on my arm tightened as we came to a stop a few feet away. Her breath hitched. "Hi, Dad," she whispered, barely audible. Tears pricked my eyes already. I swallowed hard and knelt, brushing leaves aside to lay the roses at the foot of the headstone. My fingers lingered on the cold granite as I steadied myself. Emily knelt down beside me, the framed photo in her hands. With trembling fingers, she set it gently against the base of the headstone, propping it so our smiling faces looked out at us. A crack zigzagged across the glass, bisecting our family portrait into two halves, but the image was still visible. Seeing that picture against his name carved in stone made something inside me break. A soft sob escaped before I could stop it. Emily slipped her arm through mine, leaning her head against my shoulder. Together, we knelt there, facing the resting place of the man we had both loved and who had hurt us both in different ways. A cool breeze whispered through the nearly bare branches of the maple above, and a few more golden leaves drifted down around us, tumbling over Richard's name. For a long while, neither of us spoke. We simply knelt in silence, sharing our grief, our confusion, our love, and our anger in the quiet company of the dead. When at last I opened my mouth to speak, my words came out in a shaky breath. "Hello, Richard," I said, and my voice carried both a greeting and a farewell. I traced the letters of Richard's name on the gravestone with my fingertips, feeling the cool dampness of the granite. My emotions swirled in a torrent I could barely articulate. Kneeling there, I decided to speak from my heart, unsure if it was for his sake or ours. "I loved you," I began quietly, voice trembling. "I loved you so much, and you broke my heart." A tear slipped down my cheek and dropped onto the stone. "You betrayed our trust. But you were also a wonderful father, and for many years, a good husband. Those years meant everything to me." My breath hitched. I don't know how to reconcile the Richard I loved with the man who hurt us. Maybe I never will, but I need to let this pain go. For my sake and for Emily's beside me, Emily sniffled and mustered her courage to add her own words. "Dad," she said softly, her fingers clutching my sleeve, "I was so angry at you. I still am in some ways. You weren't who I thought you were, and that's hard to accept, but I'm trying to remember the good things too. You taught me how to ride a bike, you cheered at my graduations, you made Mom laugh so often." Her voice wavered and she wiped her nose with her sleeve. I want to forgive you, Daddy, she whispered, reverting to the childhood name as her composure cracked. I'm not there yet, but maybe someday. A breeze ruffled through the grass as if in answer. I squeezed Emily's hand and we fell silent again. In that silence, I felt something shift. Nothing dramatic, but a slight easing of a long-held weight. We had spoken our truth to the silence and the stone. There was no response to be had, but it was enough that we voiced it. After a few more moments, I reached into my purse and pulled out a small object I had placed there before leaving the house. My wedding ring. The simple gold band glinted in my palm. My hand trembled as I set it down gently at the base of the headstone, nestling it amid the yellow roses. Emily watched, her eyes widening. Mom, I need to, I said softly, answering her unasked question. My gaze remained on the ring, symbol of promises that were both kept and broken. This was his, as much as mine. It belongs here now. Fresh tears welled as I let go of the ring and what it represented. It was perhaps the hardest decision I'd made since that awful day I opened Emily's email, but in that moment, it felt right. It felt like laying down a burden. Emily leaned her head against my shoulder. I put my arm around her as we both knelt in front of Richard's grave, our offerings of love and truth laid bare, the roses, the family photo, the ring. I forgive you, I whispered. Whether it was truth yet or a hope for the future, I wasn't entirely certain, but I wanted it to be true. Not today, maybe, but I will. I forgive you for being human and flawed and for the hurt you caused. And I won't let that hurt poison what's left of my life. I closed my eyes, a gentle calm settling over me. Next to me, Emily murmured a quiet, "Goodbye, Dad," under her breath. We stayed a while longer, shoulders pressed together, talking softly about small memories, like the time he taught her to drive and nearly leapt out of the car when she almost hit a mailbox, or the way he used to sing off-key in the shower. We laughed a little through our tears, finding that those happy memories could coexist with our disappointment. At last, when our hearts felt a little lighter and the morning sun had climbed higher, we knew it was time to go. We rose to our feet. I touched the gravestone one last time, then turned to my daughter and opened my arms. She stepped into them, giving me a long, heartfelt hug that expressed more than any words could. As we walked back to the car, I glanced over my shoulder at Richard's resting place growing distant. The yellow roses shone brightly against the gray stone, and my gold ring sparkled where I'd left it. The photo we gave him remained propped up, our captured smiles bidding us farewell. I knew the groundskeepers might collect these items in time, but the gesture had been made, an offering of closure. For the first time since his death, I felt a gentle peace settle around us. It wasn't absolute. There would still be hard days and lingering pain, but it was a start. We had acknowledged the hurt and also the love, and somehow I sensed that wherever Richard was, he understood and wanted that peace for us too. As we turned away from his resting place, hand in hand, I realized we were also turning a page in our own lives. Driving out of the cemetery, I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and relief. Sorrow for the way things had ended, and relief that we had faced it at last. Emily reached over and took my hand again as we passed under the wrought iron gates. Neither of us spoke, but when our eyes met briefly, she gave a small nod. We had done the right thing. In the weeks that followed our graveside farewell, life took on a new rhythm, one marked by honesty, effort, and tentative hope. Emily moved back home with me for the time being, and the house felt alive again in a way it hadn't for a long while. We cooked dinners together, sometimes talking late into the night over tea about everything and nothing. Other times we were simply companionable in our silence, each comforted by the other's presence. True to her word, Emily filed for divorce from Brian. There were logistical hurdles and difficult conversations with lawyers, but she navigated them with a steadiness that made me proud. She even started talking about applying for a new job in town, perhaps at the local marketing firm where she'd interviewed once before. Piece by piece, she was rebuilding the life she wanted, this time on her own terms. One Saturday morning, a little over a month after that stormy night she returned to me, We ventured out to the downtown farmers market together. It was the same market we used to frequent as a family, and I admit I felt a pang being there without Richard or Elaine at our side. But as we strolled past stalls of fresh produce and autumn gourds, the crisp air smelling of apples and cider, that pang eased into a gentle nostalgia rather than sharp pain. We walked arm in arm, a habit we'd taken up again when outside. Emily would lean her head against my shoulder briefly now and then, a gesture of affection that warmed me to my core. At one point, we stopped to admire a display of pumpkins. I caught sight of our neighbor Linda. She was manning a booth selling homemade jams. When she noticed us, her eyes lit up in surprise and genuine pleasure. "Well, hello, you two," Linda greeted, handing a customer their change before stepping around the table. "It's good to see you here together." Her smile was warm and knowing. I smiled back, a real smile this time. "It's good to be here," I replied. Emily squeezed my arm gently and added, "We're making a habit of Saturday markets again." Linda chatted with us a bit, just small talk about the harvest and her jam business, but I could sense her relief and curiosity. I was sure the gossip mill had kept our troubles in the air, but in that moment, none of it mattered. She saw a mother and daughter out enjoying a morning together, and that was story enough. After picking up a few items, crisp apples, a loaf of crusty bread, a jar of Linda's spiced pumpkin butter as a treat, we headed back to the car. The late autumn sun was bright, warming our faces. Emily swung our joined hands lightly between us as we walked, something she used to do in grade school on the way home. It made us both laugh. Not everything was magically perfect, of course. There were still nights. I heard Emily crying softly in her room, grieving the loss of her marriage and the illusions she'd held. On those nights, I would knock gently and crawl into bed beside her, and we'd talk or just hold each other until she fell asleep. And I had my own moments, when I opened a drawer and found an old birthday card from Richard, or when I absent-mindedly set the table for two and realized I was instinctively leaving out his place. Those moments hurt, and perhaps they always would, but we face them together now, openly. One afternoon, I found a letter in our mailbox from Elaine. My heart clenched as I recognized her neat handwriting. Inside, she had written a long apology, filled with remorse and updates on how she planned to sell her house and move to live near her sister, at least for a while. She didn't ask for forgiveness outright. She said she understood the enormity of what she'd done. She only hoped that I would someday find peace, and that I knew how much she cherished our decades of friendship despite everything. I read the letter sitting on the porch steps, the autumn breeze lifting strands of my hair. Emotions warred inside me. Old hurt, residual anger, but also a tinge of sadness for the friendship that had died. I wasn't ready to reply to her. I wasn't sure I ever wanted to resume contact, but I folded the letter gently and tucked it back in the envelope instead of tearing it up. Perhaps that was progress in its own way, allowing myself to acknowledge her apology even if I couldn't accept it yet. One crisp November day, Emily and I spent the afternoon raking leaves in our yard, much as I had done alone a month earlier. This time, though, there was laughter. We took breaks to toss armfuls of leaves at each other, and for a few blissful moments we were just a mother and daughter with no dark secrets between us, faces flushed, giggling like kids. The gloomy shadow that had hung over us lifted a little more with each passing day. As we bagged the last pile of leaves, Emily paused and looked at me with a thoughtful expression. "Mom," she said, "thank you for everything, for taking me back, for helping me find myself again." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "There's nothing to thank. You're my child. I love you, always." She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me in a tight hug, burying her face in the crook of my neck. "I love you too," she whispered. I closed my eyes and held her, breathing in the scent of fallen leaves and the faint hint of her shampoo. In that embrace, I felt the fragility and strength of what we'd rebuilt. We had been through fire and we had the scars to show for it, but we were here, together. We pulled apart and smiled at each other. The late afternoon sun painted her hair in gold. In her eyes, I saw resilience and a spark of optimism I hadn't seen in a long time. I knew there would still be challenges ahead, divorce proceedings, lingering trust issues, the slow work of healing, but I also knew we would handle them side by side. A few nights later, I found myself alone in the living room after Emily had gone to bed. The house was peaceful, filled with only the soft ticking of the mantel clock and the distant hoot of an owl outside. I curled up in Richard's old armchair, my armchair now, I supposed, with a cup of chamomile tea and allowed my mind to drift over how much had changed in so little time. On the coffee table lay a stack of documents I had reviewed that afternoon, an updated version of my will and estate plan. In the haze of anger earlier in the year, I had imagined wielding those papers like a weapon, erasing my daughter from my legacy as punishment. But now, with a clearer head and calmer heart, I had made more thoughtful decisions. I did sign those updated documents, but not out of vengeance. Instead, I set up a modest trust for Emily's future children, should she have any, and arranged for the bulk of my estate to go to a charitable foundation in Richard's name. I hadn't discussed these details with Emily. There was no need to stir up old wounds. My choice wasn't about denying her out of spite anymore. It was about encouraging her to continue standing on her own feet, to live free of any shadow my wealth might cast. After all we'd learned, I wanted her to build a life for herself founded on strength and independence, not expectation of inheritance. Perhaps it was also my way of turning a painful legacy into something positive by giving to others in need. It felt right, and that was enough. I sipped my tea and let out a long, slow breath. In the reflection of the dark window, I could see myself tired but at peace. The lines of stress on my face had softened over the past weeks. I looked perhaps a little older, but also a little wiser. The journey to this moment had been harrowing and unexpected. There were scars on all our hearts that hadn't been there a year ago. Yet, in a strange way, I felt grateful. The truth, awful as it was, had torn us apart, but it also ultimately pulled us back together on firmer ground. Our relationship now was more honest and equal than it had ever been. I had seen my daughter at her lowest, and she had seen me at mine, and we still chose to love each other through it. I thought of the fractured pieces of our lives, some now carefully mended, others still in progress. Richard's memory would always be bittersweet, a mixture of love and pain. Elaine's chapter in my life was closed, at least for now. Maybe time would dull the betrayal enough for forgiveness, or maybe not. And that was all right. Not every story tied up neatly. Life was messy, but it moved forward. My gaze drifted to the fireplace mantel where I had rearranged our family photos earlier that day. Notably, I'd placed the photo of Richard, Emily, and me from her graduation back in its spot, now in a new frame. I decided that I wouldn't hide the happy memories anymore, even if they were complicated. They were still a part of who we were. The crack in the glass was gone, replaced by clear, whole pane. A symbol, I hoped, of how we chose to remember our past. Not as a perfect picture, but as one we could still treasure despite its imperfections. Finishing my tea, I rose and wandered to the front door, flipping off the porch light. For months, I had left that light burning as a beacon for a daughter I feared lost. Tonight, the porch was dark, but only because she was safe upstairs, sleeping soundly in her old room. I no longer needed that symbolic light. We had found our way back to each other. Before heading to bed, I stepped out onto the porch for a breath of cool night air. The moon hung low and golden above the trees, and the last leaves of autumn skittered across our lawn. I wrapped my sweater tighter and closed my eyes for a moment, saying a silent prayer of thanks to fate, to resilience, to whatever had guided us through the storm. Inside, I heard the faint creak of floorboards, Emily shifting in her sleep. The sound made me smile. It was a small, ordinary thing, the kind of sound you take for granted when everything is all right. And for the first time in a long time, I felt that things really would be all right. As I finally went in and locked up for the night, I reflected on how far we had come. The fear and anger that once haunted these rooms had been replaced by laughter and the promise of better days. We would never be a perfect family, no family is, but we were a family that had faced its deepest wounds and found a way to heal. In the darkness of my bedroom, just before sleep claimed me, I whispered a final thought into the quiet. We survived. And in that simple truth lay a world of meaning. We had survived the secrets, the betrayal, the heartbreak. More than that, we had reclaimed love and hope from the ashes. Whatever tomorrow might bring, I knew we would face it together, with honesty and with grace. And that, I realized as I drifted off to sleep, was its own kind of happy ending.